Good evening, and welcome to Skep Talk, the monthly speaker series hosted by the Bay Area Skeptics. Before tonight's presentation, a few words about Bay Area Skeptics. As North America's oldest skeptical organization, we are dedicated to promoting critical thinking, logic, and rational thought. In the 1970s and 80s, scientists such as Carl Sagan and magicians such as James Randi established the scientific skepticism movement out of concern about the popular fondness for pseudoscience and the lack of public science literacy. Scientific skepticism embraces evidence-based civil discourse on health, education, consumer protection, and especially the investigation of extraordinary claims. Using the scientific method, we hope to promote skeptical inquiry to reduce irrational thinking in society. This talk is supported by Bay Area Skeptics members such as you. Please visit us at baskeptics.org or join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Meetup. Consider supporting us through convenient monthly donations via Patreon. Patrons receive premiums such as discounts and free t-shirts for our annual Skeptical Conference. But more importantly, members help us make the world just a little more reasonable and rational. And now, tonight's speaker.
Hello, my name is Gwen Olson, and as a board member of the Bay Area Skeptics, I would like to welcome you to this month's Skep Talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are honored to have as our speaker today Dr. Susan Hough. Dr. Hough has been a research geophysicist with the USGS in the Pasadena, California field office since 1992. She earned her undergraduate degrees with honors from the University of California at Berkeley and a Ph.D. in Earth Sciences from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, in 1987, and she was elected Fellow of the American Geophysical Union in 2009. Her research focuses on characterization and effects of earthquakes and includes the triggering of earthquakes by human activities. She has co-authored over 180 articles in the peer-reviewed literature and authored 5 books. Since 2009, she has led several international capacity development efforts, including the USGS Earthquake Disaster Assistance Team missions following the 2010 Haiti and 2015 Nepal earthquakes. So, to our talk. In many parts of the United States, people share similar ghostly tales involving apparitions wandering along railroad tracks in remote areas, searching for the remains of loved ones who perished in a gruesome railroad accident. Dr. Hough also studies the interplay between earthquakes and culture, as well as historical earthquakes. And so with that background, Charleston, South Carolina sits on a major fault and was the site of the largest earthquake ever recorded on the East Coast, with an estimated magnitude of 7.0. Enduring lore there describes one such ghost in the Charleston, South Carolina area, and there are stories clustered in the Summerville area where the 1886 Charleston earthquake struck. To that end, Dr. Hough will be discussing the lore of the Summerville Ghost, along with some of the ghosts in the other areas and how they can be explained by earthquake phenomena, including earthquake lights. Dr. Hough, we are thrilled to have you join us tonight, and I can't wait to hear how you put together what appears to me to be such disparate subjects.
Thank you so much, Gwen, and Steve, and to the Bay Area Skeptics for organizing this and giving me a chance to tell some ghost stories. So let me see if I can start the presentation, and hopefully everyone will see my slides in presentation
and
mode.
I'll just hand it off to you. I can't wait to hear it.
Okay, so can everyone see my slides, is the question. Can I get a thumbs up, or an audible thumbs up would be great. Can people hear me and see me? Okay, I can't hear anything. So I don't know if anybody can hear me. This worked great yesterday when we did a dry run. So I'm going to stop sharing because I'm worried about who I'm. Okay, sorry about that.
Actually, things are working just fine. So.
Oh, well, it's great.
Yeah, no worries.
When I went into presentation mode, I could see my screen, but I couldn't hear anything.
We could hear you fine. So it was all good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll
So,
just need you to upload your presentation again, because when you took that down,
oh,
took that off,
okay.
and then we'll get that up there again.
Can you see it now?
I don't see it quite yet.
Oh,
You
shoot.
need to share that screen again.
Okay.
Yes, you're not
Sorry
going to
about
hear
that.
us. Yeah, you're not going to hear us
Okay.
during your presentation, but we can hear you just fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
everything was going.
Yeah.
Okay. So share screen. Sorry about that.
No problem.
That's okay.
Technical difficulties always happen.
Yes.
Well,
There we
there we
go.
go.
Okay, that's
You can
taken
see
back
my
on.
screen, and now I'm going to
Yeah.
go into presentation mode. Come on. Okay. I just need to get that window to go away, and poof. Come on. You can do it. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see the talk and can hear me. And I'm not hearing anything, but that's okay. So we're going to talk about ghost stories for a little while, and ghost stories should rightly be told around a campfire at maybe midnight in a dark and spooky place. Well, this make it spooky. It's not midnight. My days in the office actually start at 6 a.m. So 7:30 p.m. is late enough for me. Anyway, so okay, let's talk about ghosts, and let's set the stage. I need to talk a little bit about Charleston. So it was the site of a large earthquake, one of the largest in historic times east of the Rockies in 1886. It caused significant damage to the city of Charleston. This is sort of a crummy map, but just to get people oriented. So the inset shows the southeastern United States. The square is Charleston, and then you blow up. You can see the Charleston Peninsula, the towns around Charleston, and this town of Summerville was established literally as a summertime retreat up in the pines away from the lowlands early on. And so I'm going to be talking a lot about Summerville, and we could ignore the other details for now. I'll get back to them. But I just wanted everyone to be oriented. And the ghost stories that I'm going to be talking about were centered in this town of Summerville. So I started working on the Charleston earthquake going back to 2022 or so. It's remained enigmatic, even though it was large and relatively well documented. And to study the earthquake, I was looking for every scrap of information that I could find that described how the built environment responded, how the natural environment responded, and what people experienced. Well, if you go looking for books in the Charleston area, you quickly find whole books about ghost stories, and there's a whole volume that's devoted to Summerville alone. This structure on the front is actually a part of an old church that was ruined before the earthquake struck, but was further damaged. You can actually see some of the scars of the earthquake if you go to visit it today. So in the town of Summerville, they tell the story of the Summerville Light, or the Summerville Ghost. The story goes that a woman once waited for her husband at the end of a trunk railroad line. He never showed up. She later found out that he had been killed in a railroad accident and decapitated. His head was never recovered. So these stories get quite gruesome. But the story goes that she would walk along the track for years thereafter, carrying a lantern, searching for her husband's head. Okay, ghost stories. Well, so where is this ghost? This was a story that was told actively through the 70s, the 80s, 1970s and 80s, so not that long ago. And people would go out in cars and go ghost busting. It was sort of a thing to do. And this light was sometimes seen. So you can identify where it was. This is an old topo map that shows the city of Summerville nearby Lincolnville, which was actually founded by freed slaves. And at the time of the earthquake, the area to the southeast was underlain by a combination of thick forests and swamps. It was very sparsely populated. There was a lumber railroad line that was built. It wasn't there in 1886. It was built afterwards. It was there in 1919. It's since been removed. So this ghost wanders along the path of this old line. And that line now, access to it was lost when a freeway interchange was built off the 26. But you can see it in this Google Earth. If you can see my cursor, there's the path that cuts through. That is the road that follows this old railroad line. And that's where people would go, pile in their cars and go look for the ghost. Old Sheep Island Road is the name of it. So it turns out there's a number of ghostly tales that are centered in Summerville. And this Summerville Ghost is one of them. But there's other stories. People in Summerville say they hear noises, and especially on the upper floors of old houses. They hear rattling. Objects sometimes move, doors sometimes swing, cars can be shaken, and sometimes people describe actual human apparitions, and they describe clothing and the whole 9 yards. So before I get to the next slide, I need to give you a bit of a seismology introduction that I assume most people are familiar with, but in case you aren't, I want to talk about Berkeley earthquake intensities. So you've probably seen maps like this. We call them shake maps that show how the ground shook after an earthquake happens. This was the map for the Ridgecrest earthquake in 2019. And red is very severe shaking, and down to purple is very lightly felt. Well, what these maps show, it's not ground acceleration or anything, that's a physical parameter. It's what we call intensity. And this is a very old idea, very old scale that describes shaking in terms of its effect on people in the built environment. So intensity 10 can cause catastrophic damage, down to intensity 2 is very lightly felt. Intensity 1 is not felt. So that's what intensities are, and you've very likely seen them, but whether you're aware of what they mean or not. So you go back to these ghostly tales and these effects that people describe. And the middle 6 of them jump off the page to a seismologist because they're basically the indicators for Mercalli intensity 2. When shaking is at the very edge of perceptibility, people may not notice it. Often they don't, but they may feel something. They may notice something, but you look at the description, felt indoors by few, especially on upper floors, or by sensitive or nervous persons. Hanging objects may swing, especially when delicately suspended. Trees, structures, liquids, bodies of water may sway. Doors may swing. It starts to sound familiar. Birds, animals may respond. So basically what people are describing is, a lot of it is very readily explained by small earthquakes that aren't quite big enough to be recognized as earthquakes. So very small, shallow local earthquakes. Now, what about human apparitions? Okay, seismology can't explain everything. There's no ready explanation for how an earthquake could generate an actual ghost. But moving on, the next question is the accounts of orbs of light, which are central to the lore about the Summerville Ghost. Well, earthquake lights are a phenomenon that I would say is generally accepted to be real, that although we don't have a mature, complete theory to explain what people report, and a big part of the problem, there's 2 problems. It's a very ephemeral effect, one, and in the modern environment, if lights are generated, they're harder and harder to see because you have so many cultural effects, transformers exploding and that sort of thing. But if you go back to older accounts of earthquakes, that pulled out one from 1799, people talk about lights sometimes preceding earthquakes, often following or accompanying strong shaking. After this first shock, this is 1799, a red light was seen for several nights. On the right is an account from 1751, 1755, that lights were seen in the sky before, in this case, New England earthquakes in 1755, 1727. There are accounts from the New Madrid seismic zone, which had a sequence of big earthquakes in 1811, 1812. And this account is actually interesting. It's fuzzy, but it talks about flashes of fire that were seen to issue into the air or run upon the ground. And this article was actually linking it. It's kind of the somewhat the older language, but it's talking about gaseous matter generated from combustibles that might be kindled into blazes when it came in contact with the atmosphere. It talks about a sulfurous smell. So in this case, they were actually they were explaining these lights in terms of gas release. So these accounts have been around for quite a while. There are accounts of sulfur smells in the Charleston area, and the sulfur smells accompanying earthquake phenomenon. So there's plenty of, if you want swamp gases, there's plenty of that in the Charleston Low Country. Now, people may know that lights are sometimes seen without earthquake phenomenon, known as will-o'-the-wisps, where you get these orbs of light, and it's thought to be related to gas release. So the fact that lights are seen in Summerville, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with earthquakes, but there's a number of reasons why it can make that association, and I want to go through them. What suggests a link between this light, this ghostly lore, and earthquakes specifically? So the first, I've already talked about the fact that the accounts basically are consistent with very small, shallow earthquakes. If you look at this map now that I showed you at the beginning, there were a couple of earthquakes that were relatively big for the area. In 1960, 1959, it was a 4.4. The lore is about the ghost, as far as I can tell, got started in the 60s. It describes a ghost that was wandering around in the 19th century, but people weren't telling that story until around 1960. And right around that time, there were some earthquakes right in that area. The circle is the location of the 4.4, 1959. But the seismic data back then was so limited. So it was within a few kilometers of where the ghost is reported, but that location is uncertain to probably at least a few miles. So, okay, that's one line of evidence that the phenomena are associated with earthquakes. Another is that we're still not sure what happened in the 1886 earthquake, but it's fairly certain that Summerville was ground zero, that the earthquake nucleated very close to Summerville and generated especially severe shaking there. And we know about the nucleation because very small earthquakes were felt and described in Summerville days before the main shock and then hours before. And when earthquakes have foreshocks, they're almost always very close to the immediate area where the main shock nucleates. So we have that line of evidence. And then this gets to the work that I've done. This is the railroad line, not the trunk line where the ghost is seen, but the railroad line that runs from Charleston up to Summerville. It goes up a hill in this area. And if you look up the track, lo and behold, it makes this bend to the right. When they put in old railroads in the 19th century, they relied on line of sight surveying. So when you went up a hill, you had line of sight. So tracks were built straight. You wouldn't have built a track like this. And the most astute geologist who surveyed the area after the earthquake for a few weeks said that the track was, quote, forced to the right in this location. So that bend has actually been preserved. Now, this also jumps off the page to an earthquake scientist, because when that earthquake happened, it disturbed the railroad tracks in all sorts of ways. The tracks run through swamps. So there was what we call lateral spreading, slumping into rivers, and other effects. But to move something sideways like this is the key hallmark of a lateral movement in a fault like the San Andreas. If you had a train track going over the San Andreas and you had a really big earthquake, you'd yank the track apart. But imagine if the fault didn't come all the way to the surface, but petered out and things moved sideways. Instead of yanking the track apart, you would bend it like this. So this is very characteristic. And this is what got my co-author and I thinking that, oh, well, this is the fault must cross these tracks. And why didn't the geologist recognize this in 1886? Because in 1886, nobody understood what an earthquake was. They didn't understand the association between earthquakes and faults until about a decade later. If they had, this geologist for sure would have gone looking perpendicular to the tracks, but sadly, he didn't spend much time doing that. So this is the map that Roger Billam and I came up with. This is actually the earlier version of our later model. So you can again see Charleston, Summerville's on there. And so this red line is this fault that we think moved and had like shallow lateral movement like the San Andreas. We also think the earthquake had a deeper component. And this fault has actually been recognized based on subsurface data by previous researchers. It's called the Gans fault. And the faults at the surface commonly have splays, they feather, they branch. So past studies have led to the recognition of the Gans fault and a strand of the fault that was labeled G1 that actually runs very close to Summerville. Well, where are the ghosts seen? It's essentially, as near as we can tell, right on the G1 strand. So there is an association between the ghosts and a fault strand that has been identified. And so why am I showing this now? I have to remember. I know. So one of the criticisms of this work when I talked about it was the fact that earthquake lights weren't described in 1886. If earthquake lights are generated in this area during small earthquakes, well, surely they'd be generated in a very large earthquake. And there's two answers to that. One is going back to this area, this is where the lights tend to happen. There was almost nobody living out there in 1886. It was swamps and forests. The other explanation is that lights were seen. And there's a little snippet of an article of people talking about blue flames that were being seen with the earthquakes. They were dismissed by the geologist who was collecting accounts. He didn't think that they were necessarily reliable. And there's another intriguing bit of lore that I wonder about. There's another ghost story that is told about the night of the earthquake, that the station master in Summerville was visited by this elderly Black gentleman who came in and said the tracks near Summerville had been damaged by the earthquake and the station master should slow the trains down. And the story goes that the station, and then this man disappeared into the night. I should have said the earthquake happened around 10 o'clock at night. So it was definitely night. The story goes that the station master set off flares to warn the train, and that the train did slow down. There were no derailments in this immediate area that night, and the next morning there were in other areas. The part that I wonder about is those flares. That were lights seen, and that was the germ of a ghost story about the station master setting off flares. That's total speculation. But there is evidence that lights were seen that night. You just wouldn't have had the population to see them. So, okay, can you explain these orbs of light, and they're described as being different colors, sometimes white, orange, greenish, mostly white. Can you explain those as earthquake lights? And again, earthquake lights, it's not like we have a theory that you can tie up with a bow and that is universally accepted. But there was a paper in 2024 by a Japanese scientist who was reviewing the literature, and he proposed that these orbs of light could basically be explained by radon luminescence. So if you have radon emitted along shallow faults, that produces gamma rays, and then he appealed to water vapor or methane to sort of trap particles, form clouds, and then he appealed to scattering to generate different colors. That was a very quick explanation. But radioluminescence, radon, if it's released, decays. It releases alpha particles. The alpha particles can excite air molecules, and when the air molecules return to a rest state, you can get an electrical discharge, you can get luminescence. And that's sort of the gist of it. So without getting into gory details, you have, you again have these lights right along the strand where potentially radon could be released. Okay, well, let me go on and talk before I get back to some of the ideas about that. Let me talk about other ghosts. So it turns out, if you look into the newspaper archives, there are other ghosts in other areas. In Gurdon, oh gosh, where was this? Arkansas, I think. There's a light that's seen again along a railroad track known as the Gurdon Light. Chapel Hill, Tennessee, not Chapel Hill, North Carolina. There's a small town, a dirt road leading out of town, crosses a railroad track. And on damp and drizzly nights, people report a bright light moving down the tracks when no train's passing through. Hundreds of people claim to have seen it. Same description, large luminous ball of light appearing, weaving, etc. Oh, and this is attributed to the headless signalman. That's the lore. The Mako ghost has a name. This is Mako, North Carolina, near Wilmington. The Mako ghost is said to be the ghost of conductor Joe Baldwin, who was killed in a railroad accident. He was also beheaded. And the story goes that he returns to the track carrying a lantern in search of his own head. Now, why a headless ghost would carry a lantern to search for his own head is left as an exercise for the reader. But that's the story. Malvern, Pennsylvania, a place called Duffy's Cut. A man died. He either murdered or died of cholera. It's not. And one of the workers along a railroad track, and ghosts are described in this area. So there is a whole army of ghosts wandering around railroad tracks, carrying lanterns, looking for mostly severed heads. There start to be themes that you can tell by now. They're dark and misty nights. People describe glowing orbs, often different colors, white, green, orange, and they're along railroad tracks. Okay, so why are ghosts partial to railroad tracks? One reason is that railroading in the 19th century offered a lot of job opportunities, but it was damn dangerous. People were killed in railroad accidents. This little article is from 1906. It describes conductor Hough and Brakeman Simpson being killed in an accident outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Conductor Hough was my paternal great-grandfather. William Hough. So, one of many people who were killed. So if you want to have gruesome ghost stories, that railroads are natural places to have them. So there is that. But is there more to that? Is there a reason why these ghosts are partial to tracks? And I think there is, but I don't have the whole story yet. But faults tend to form natural corridors through the landscape because they're moving, blocks relative to each other that carves out corridors. So railroads might tend to follow faults naturally because of that. Railroad corridors are dark and remote. So if you're going to have earthquake lights, it's a place where they might be generated. If the tracks are following fault lines, that's a place where you may have gas release. It's known that radon can be released along shallow faults. There's the association with water vapor, the dark and misty nights, which fits in with Enomoto's theory that the water vapor is able to trap particles. And then atmospheric oxygen, you obviously have that. And then the question is, how do the tracks fit into this? And that's what I wonder. I have ideas, but nothing that is really satisfying. If you spend time poking around railroad tracks in the Southeast, which I've done, investigating the 1886 earthquake, one of the things you find out is that there's a lot of old steel lying around. They lopped off mileposts and just left the detritus. They took out old tracks and left the old rail on the right of way. They didn't take it out. You can find old spikes. So there's a lot of metal around. There's the tracks themselves. So how could tracks figure into the ghost stories? Static electricity could be part of it because you can get a buildup of static electricity along tracks. Could there be some sort of induction phenomenon? Could the rails be acting as an antenna in some way? Again, I don't know, but they're clearly a part of the story. And then it's basically hinging on this idea of radioluminescence to generate the lights themselves. So with that's sort of the ghost story and the explanation for the ghost story. I want to now spend the last few minutes talking about the idea that maybe our ghosts are actually friendly ghosts. And what do I mean by that? Well, so sort of earthquake 101A, earthquake science. This is a map of the tectonic plates. So people, I expect, know that the Earth's crust is broken into about a dozen major plates and then minor ones that move relative to one another. And earthquakes are concentrated along the boundaries between active plates. The plates move typically about as fast as your fingernails grow. And so we understand the bulk of the earthquakes that happen around the world within the framework of plate tectonics, which was established back in the 60s and 70s. Okay, but why do we get earthquakes within plates? If you look at North America, it's within one plate, the eastern US. The eastern seaboard, you have the continent transitioning to the oceanic crust, but there's no active plate boundary. The continent is pretty much glued to the seafloor, and they don't move relative to each other like they do in the West. So why are you getting earthquakes? Why in the middle of Australia or in Eurasia? And we still don't, 70 years after the plate tectonics revolution, we still don't have a single overarching theory to explain intra-plate quakes, earthquakes within plates. Excuse me. And if you look at an earthquake map, this is the earthquake catalog in the eastern US going back. back to, as far as we know, back to around 1800, there's actually quite a few earthquakes. I mean, most of these are very small, but this blue dot on the map is a 6.2 that happened up in Canada in 1935. You can see the 1886 Charleston earthquake. New Madrid is over here. So there's quite a few earthquakes. And this is something that the scientific community still struggles with, is to explain where and why earthquakes happen. If you read papers, it brings to mind the parable of the blind man or the blind girls feeling the elephant. There's theories that people have come up with that earthquakes happen in New Madrid because that part of the crust was pulling apart in the geologic past. It's what we call a failed rift. Other people say, oh, it's a rift pillow, that you have this dense material deep in the crust, and that's causing stresses. Some people say it's the crust rebounding from the last glace age. But you really wonder, theories explain some areas, but not other. We really don't have a theory for the elephant as a whole. And the big reason we don't is we have so little data compared to a place like California, where we have a lot of earthquakes and to study. When you look at Eastern North America, there are no knowns. There are places where we know earthquakes have happened, including Charleston, New Madrid, Cape Ann, Massachusetts in 1755, Charlevoix up in Quebec, 1663, central New Hampshire. And then in central Virginia, most recently, it was a magnitude 5.8 earthquake. So we have earthquake zones we know about, but we don't understand them necessarily well. I went forward too fast. There are places where earthquakes have happened in the prehistoric past, where we have evidence, although we don't have the accounts weren't described in written records. So that includes a fault in Oklahoma, a place in Arkansas, central New Hampshire. The 1638 earthquake was described just barely. And then in Vincennes, Indiana, there's evidence for a quite large earthquake about 6,000 years ago. So a spattering of good-sized earthquakes. But the real question is the unknown unknowns. That we don't know what we don't know. We've only seen a few hundred years of earthquake history. And if earthquakes are happening every 10,000 years, we just haven't seen earthquakes light up the faults the way they do in California. So what about Wilmington, the ghost of Joe Baldwin in Mako? Could there be a fault in that area? Well, if you go to the earthquake map, Wilmington is not an earthquake hotspot. There's very few earthquakes along the North Carolina coast. There's just one in the modern USGS catalog, and that was in 1884. It's known from felt reports. If you look at this older map from a research study, there were aftershocks of the 1886 earthquake that were described only in Wilmington and no place else. And this study concluded that there were a number of aftershocks that were happening in this area. So there is just a bit of evidence that earthquakes have happened in this area, but very few, a small handful. Except that, so you wouldn't think much of it, but Wilmington turns out to be geologically interesting. Another old map. There's what's called the Cape Fear Arch, which is a zone that is known to be uplifting. It's going up very, very slowly, but enough that you can measure it as this anomalous area. And it's not understood why. It doesn't, frankly, get a whole lot of attention. But the ghost of Joe Baldwin is roaming around with his light essentially right within this Cape Fear Arch. So, I haven't been there, I haven't pinpointed where he's seen, but potentially it's illuminating a shallow fault within the structure. And there is reason to think that something geological is going on in this area. So this is what I want to leave with, this idea. So let's start with this map. This is the the East Coast again. The earthquakes that we know about, Charleston, Mineral, Cape Ann, 1755, this earthquake that's thought to have been in New Hampshire in 1638. So we have these source zones, but now let's add a few of the ghosts that I've talked about. And lo and behold, they're kind of along the same zone. So the question is, are these friendly ghosts illuminating active shallow source zones in areas where earthquakes are possible but infrequent? And so it's kind of an out there hypothesis. Scientists don't usually work on ghost stories. I had reporters ask me what I planned to do next, and I kind of hemmed and hawed because the USGS doesn't pay me to work on ghost stories. But there are testable hypotheses here that if radon or other gases are being emitted at fault zones, that's something that could be detected. If there are shallow faults, there should be other evidence of faulting, say in Mako or these other places. And we have done some work to look for them in Summerville. Is there evidence for prehistoric earthquakes in any of these regions? And you can see sometimes disturbances in the strata. You can see paleoliquefaction. And then more could definitely be done to synthesize the observations. I've talked about ghosts that are in the eastern US. There are ghostly lights described in other parts of the world. So there are things that one could look at, and it's not just good, silly fun. The hypothesis is that this may be illuminating earthquake faults and potentially earthquake hazard. So with that, I will say thank you to folks who tuned in, again, to Bay Area Skeptics, to Steve, who put together this advertisement, which is the coolest advertisement for a talk that I've given. So I'm happy to have joined you for a bit of time. I think there's time for questions.
Yes.
I think I have to stop sharing to be able to actually hear anybody. So maybe I can do that.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Can you hear me, Susan?
Hopefully y'all are still there.
Oh, can you hear me, Susan? Hello, can you hear me?
Susan, can you hear Gwen?
Can you hear me?
Oh, we have a little audio problem.
Okay, oops.
We can hear you fine. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I did. I lost you for a second, but then
Okay.
Okay.
We put Gwen back on there.
Okay, thank you. That was very interesting. I had some questions. So are most of these ghost sightings tend to be in rural areas? Do you ever hear of any in these cities along railroad tracks or?
No, and I think these lights, you need the corridor, the railroad tracks are dark corridors, and I think that's a part of it. These lights are going to be faint, if it's radon luminescence. This isn't, it's going to be faint. So I don't think the lights are going to be seen when you have too much cultural light going on. And then when earthquakes happen, it's loud, it's things break, transformers explode.
So are they as common in, say, rural roads as they are on railroads? Because they tend to follow the same type of landscape as railroad tracks.
Yeah, no, they're not. They really are tied to railroad tracks. When I went looking for ghost stories, it just pops up. I didn't pick out the ghosts that are on tracks.
Yeah.
They're that's what comes up. So the tracks are a part of it in some way.
Okay.
And somebody smarter than me is going to have to figure that part out.
I wonder if the asphalt is blocking some of the emanations, so anyway, that's interesting.
Yeah, so actually that's, so if a track is following a shallow fold, it's not blanketed the way a road would be, the railroad. Yeah, that's a point.
Oh, okay. So do we have any questions from the audience? How long were the orbs observed before, during, and after the quake? Did the orbs stay around for a few minutes, or were they flashes? This is from Mr. KDFY. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I don't, if you look at the stories of people who went looking for the Summerville light, people will say, like one person said that their car shook. Well, that's an earthquake. But I don't have accounts that say I felt an earthquake and I saw lights. You have people who feel earthquakes, and then you have these lights are seen sometimes with other phenomenon. They're described as hovering, and in the air they're around for seconds, at least long enough to sort of watch them a little bit. But yeah, and then the accounts of lights near Summerville in 1886, I don't have details of exactly what was seen.
Okay. Do we have another question? Joe Ellett asked, is it possible that lights are from breaking chemical bonds?
I don't know is the short answer, and I'm not, this very quickly gets outside of my wheelhouse scientifically, so getting into geochemistry, and maybe you can tell that. I thought Enomoto's theory made a certain amount of sense, but I'm sure there's other possibilities.
Okay. And Bay Area skeptics ask, the headless phenomenon seems to be overrepresented in these ghosts. Any idea why heads seem to be such a common missing item in these regions? And I always also want to know why they need a lantern.
That's the question. You don't have a head, you don't need a lantern. So, I think railroad accidents were gruesome. People were decapitated. Newspapers used to be less circumspect than they are now. Newspaper articles would include gory details about decapitation, and now maybe, I'm laughing. It's not necessarily funny. But
oh, okay. Anything? Okay. Any other questions, Steve? Various skeptics ask if railroad tracks were built along linear fault features, and here in California, our highway system also exploits fault lineation. Think Highway 13 in the East Bay. I wonder if there are California. I imagine he's asking for ghosts, and
I'm not aware of ghosts in California, which is interesting because we certainly have faults. And the like in Southern California, Cajon Pass, that pass is there because of the San Andreas. So if you drive between San Bernardino and up over the mountains, the fault is running sideways, but the road comes up and then it kind of goes up the pass is there. So definitely roadways do exploit fault corridors in some cases. But now one thing, you don't tend to have swamps in California. It's more arid than you do in the East. So if you need to have, and this is where the theories sort of, blur together. You're appealing to water soluble gases. Is sulfur a part of this? Is methane a part of it? You would tend to have different settings in the East than you do in California. But there's, this is,
That's a good point. Okay. Well, that was our last question. And I thank you for this talk. It was very fascinating. I learned a lot about earthquakes and about the interplay of earthquakes and ghost sightings. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was a great talk. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And so Thank you for joining us tonight. And please join us for our next Skep Talk on Thursday, May 14th at 7:30. Charlatans have been swindling people probably for as long as people have existed. But today, in the age of the internet, it has become more lucrative than ever. And a single creative charlatan can weave a web of worldwide scams. Our next speaker, Quico Toro, co-author of the book Charlatans, will be joining us to speak on swindles in the digital age. Please join us in what promises to be an illuminating talk. I'll see you then. Good night.